For those of you who are not familiar with ClientSuccess, or you're just getting familiar with ClientSuccess, we are a customer success management platform and more. Historically, we have been a solo platform, really helping customers, what we said, manage from new to renew, so that entire post-initial sales life cycle. But we are so much more than that. Over the past several months, if you've been following our journey, we've had a series of acquisitions, including one of my personal favorites, Baton. If you're not familiar with Baton, it is an onboarding solution, but so much more. I do encourage you, if you are somebody who leads onboarding, whether it's in your customer success function, you're part of an implementation team, take a peek at it. You will not be disappointed. We have been moving folks over to our solution for the past several months now, and the feedback is fantastic. So if you're interested in learning more about Baton, you can go ahead and scan that QR code. It will bring you to some more information and get a demo scheduled. So if you are interested, I definitely recommend you go check it out. I would love to introduce my friend, Rob Zambito. So Rob, welcome to our webinar today. So Rob, I'm going to pass this over to you to get us started on the fundamentals of customer expansion. Confessions of a Reluctant Salesperson.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. It's nice to be here. And thank you to ClientSuccess and Christy for the invite. I'm really excited to talk about this topic. If I don't know you already, my name is Rob Zambito. I'm a 3-time customer success leader. I'm a full-time consultant. I am founder and CEO of Success Scaled Consulting, where we help early stage companies, early stage customer success programs figure out all the basic post-acquisition journey, from onboarding to support to renewals, churn handling, expansion, advocacy, and more. So I've been at this game for some time. I'll share a little bit more about my background momentarily. But for now, just know I'm also co-host of the Daily Stand-Up Podcast. I'm here to talk to you today about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, although trust me, I wish it were not. And prior versions of myself, Rob 10 years ago, would have cringed to hear myself say this, that I will talk about customer expansion, customer upsells, customer cross-sells, all those things that I avoided like the plague early in my career. And so color me surprised that the first time I built a customer success team, the customer success team ended up owning 2/3 of net new revenue. We had 130% NRR. We led the company to unicorn status. And that was not in large part thanks to me. That was in large part thanks to brilliant people that we brought onto the team and worked with, that I got to work with. And I want to walk you through my journey, because I suspect that somewhere in that journey, you're along that path somewhere. And I want to give you some advice. What I'll be doing is I'll be walking through an actual 30, 60, 90 plan, which is a very, very expedited version of my 10-year journey in customer success. And I'd love for you all to gain some valuable insights. I initially called this Coffee is for Closers. I used to call this presentation Coffee is for Closers. And the thing that shocks me is I said that once in front of a sales audience and they laughed at me. I said it in front of a customer success audience and they all said, "What is that a reference to? I don't know." And so they didn't know the reference Coffee is for Closers. So if you don't know that reference, I'm just going to give you a quick 90-second clip on a movie that you probably may have seen, or you may have seen at some point. Always Be Closing. Thank you, Emma. And if you don't know it, just follow along, because this is the type of thing that really represents why I was so resistant to sell. So hang tight and tell me, complain in the chat if you can't hear the audio. I think you will. Christy and I tested.
Let me have your attention for a moment.
It's censored, by the way.
Let's talk about something important.
Are they all here?
All but one.
Well, I'm going anyway.
Let's talk about something important. Put that coffee down.
Coffee's for closers only. You think I'm with you? I am not with you. I'm here from downtown. I'm here from Mitch and Murray.
And I'm here on a mission of mercy.
Your name's Levine? Yeah. You call yourself a salesman?
Because the good news is you're fired. The bad news is you've got just 1 week to regain your job, starting with tonight. Starting with tonight's sit.
Oh, have I got your attention now? Good. Because we're adding a little something to this month's sales contest. As you all know, first prize is a Cadillac Eldorado. Anybody want to see second prize? Second prize is a set of steak knives. Third prize is you're fired.
That's all we'll watch for now. If you haven't seen the movie, which most of my customer success friends have not, most of my sales friends have, please check it out. And I think it encapsulates so well one of the reasons why we in customer success often cringe when it comes to selling functions in customer success. Meanwhile, there's immense industry pressure now to force customer success back into, and I say back into, because a lot of customer success's origins, back into a selling function. So if you're anything like me, that should have pumped you up and it just didn't. The first time I saw that clip, I was in my first SaaS job. The director of sales pulled me into a dark conference room. He played the clip as part of my onboarding. And I just started laughing. Because I was like, this is really cute. This is a cute little gimmick you guys got going on. And he was like, no, you're supposed to take this seriously. We watch this every morning. And I was like, you watch this every morning? I was shocked. And he was like, bad news is you're fired. Good news is you get to earn your job back. And I was like, okay, this is ridiculous. Like, I do not belong in sales. And I immediately realized there were things inside of me that were just saying absolute no to this. And I eventually found my way into partner success, which I later called customer success. So the really funny thing is, at that time in my life, I was like, I'm not meant to sell. If anything, I should be in academia or something. Like my background is in psychology, consumer psychology, behavioral economics, that kind of thing. And so obviously my sales director was not too happy when I was laughing. But the key thing is this highlights a big difference in how we culture build in pre-acquisition sales, AKA sales, and post-acquisition sales, AKA customer success, account management, which we're going to be talking about today. The cultures, the playbooks, the values, they're all entirely different. And sometimes, honestly, to our detriment. So we're going to unpack that a little bit more. So I want to learn about you all as an audience. I want you to just sit here and ask yourself just very briefly, do you, in your heart of hearts, do you identify as a salesperson? Most of the audience here is in customer success. We have some people in account management, some in sales, probably some in product, but do you really, if you're in customer success, identify as a salesperson? I'm already seeing some no's in the chat. Most of us, I'm seeing a lot of no's in the chat, thumbs down. Most of us, when we think sales, we think memes like this, like, you just accepted my LinkedIn request. Did we just become best friends? Or, you know, I'm something of a whatever you said myself. Let's do more yeses and nos. I got a wide array of no's there. Have you heard this debate? Who should own expansion, customer success or sales? And this is where we start to see the immediate misalignment. I'm seeing a ton of yeses in the chat. That's a huge thing, right? I mean, if we're saying that we don't identify as a salesperson, but we are supposed to own expansion, it creates this pressure where yes or no, do you want to and do you need to refine your sales skills? This, I assume you wouldn't be here if the answer wasn't yes. And on a more serious note, I think the pressure has never gotten more than I've seen it now. And I said the same thing 2 years ago, it's only gotten tougher since. Have you seen this hashtag on LinkedIn? I remember 3 years ago, it was like almost seen as sacrilege to post that you were open to work, but we've seen such massive slashing across various industries. And I'm just calling the reality what it is. A lot of that's happened across customer success and post-sale functions, post-acquisition functions. And that underscores how important the pressure is right now. Expansion selling has moved from being optional to being mandatory. And so people like me who are really resistant, we're in for a hard battle. So the last question I just have is just a quick yes or no. Have you felt uncomfortable selling? And the reason I ask this is because it's really important to take a moment of reflection and ask yourself why. I'm seeing yeses across the board. For some of us, it's a lack of skill. For some of us, it's a lack of bandwidth. We're like, how could I possibly think about upselling my customers when I have an escalation? I have an urgent support ticket. I have a customer blocked in onboarding. I have a customer I'm supposed to apparently get a referral from. I have a customer who's a churn risk. Like how, so some of us, it's a lack of bandwidth. Some of us, it's purely a lack of interest. I've had a CSM on my team before who said, I don't care if you gave me 40 more hours in the week, I wouldn't bother selling. That's just not me. And that's a valid way to approach expansion, or rather a valid way to approach customer success in a certain respect, but obviously creates a lot of pressure. And for some of us, it's a pure lack of opportunity. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little bit angry at the fact that so many of our organizations are telling us, why can't you just go upsell and cross-sell? And they're not providing the same resources that our sales counterparts get. That is not to throw shade at anybody in the industry. It's just saying that there's a disproportionate amount of resources allocated to net new sales, where they get to ring gongs and get all the like fancy learning management systems and fancy sales cadence tooling and stuff like that, which we're going to go through, that we may not see in customer success. We often don't see in customer success. So the way that I've aggregated all this background, just some quick background on me. I like to just do a quick intro by the numbers. Like I said, 10 years in customer success, 3 CS teams, 1 unicorn with 2/3 of net new revenue in customer success. But now with my consulting firm, Success Scaled Consulting, we've worked with 26 companies. We have a library of over 90 templates that are plug and play. One podcast that I co-host, The Daily Stand-Up, which you all would, I'd love to see you there. Christy's been a guest. We've had other folks I saw in the chat as guests and some return guests. We'd love to have you on as a guest sometime, and we have about 250 episodes. We publish an episode every weekday. Some other facts by the numbers. I like these random facts. I've inadvertently designed 3 tattoos just based on doodles that I drew at work. I've also cut 22 people's hair because I'm aspiring to be a barber whenever I retire. It's a lightweight goal of mine. Another random fact, a customer success story in the wild. I've been to 98 Planet Fitness locations. I thought I'd be more jacked by now, but apparently I'm not. Anyway, that's me. But the key thing to know is that across all of these companies, the land and expand motion was quite similar. And I've had the opportunity to see similar playbooks applied across a wide variety of models, whether it's B2B, B2C, whether it's enterprise, SMB, or whether it's vertical SaaS, horizontal SaaS, or any of a variety of other segments. But that's me. I want to talk about you and why you're here. I assume if you showed up here, you showed up because you want to leave here with a playbook that you can take to your teams so that you can leave the session with some actionable strategies that you can put in practice today. Like I said, this is structured as a 30, 60, 90 plan that, you know, for those of us who are leaders in the room, we might be able to take this plan to our leadership team and excel at customer expansion. This diagram I drew on the right because I drew this actually when I was living in the chaotic world of customer success. I couldn't make sense of it. I was like, I'm always living in the world of reactive firefighting. So what if I draw this diagram that says, what's the first principle of our customer success team? First principle of our customer success team is we need to be a revenue function. And it's funny because that went out of style about 3-4 years ago. Now it's back in style. And I'm like, this isn't style. This is just the first principle of customer success. I truly believe customer success has to be a revenue function. We can't continue on being the happiness department that some of those departments emerged over the last few years. And so if that's the center of the diagram, the 3 legs of the stool are we have to retain our customers, we have to prevent churn, we have to expand our customers, we have to upsell and cross-sell our customers, and we have to make our customers advocates so that our customer base is a growth engine, primarily by way of referrals. However, most of us in customer success spend our time thinking about all the little leading indicators of retention only. But those are just the beginning of the board game that is customer success. I call it a board game because I like to think of it as a game sometimes. It helps me deal with difficult situations with a little bit more levity. We're thinking about time to value, we're thinking about usage, we're thinking about NPS, but those things are just the tip of the spear. So we're going to shift our attention to the top right and I would welcome anybody else to have conversations about any of the other pieces of this puzzle that is customer success. But in the top right, what even is expansion? So I would broadly define it as the increase in revenue attributable to existing customers, which sounds simple, right? However, it gets a little bit more complicated because when you start thinking about customer-led growth in general, you realize that, there's customer-led growth by way of advocacy, and then there's by way of expansion. Expansion takes the form of cross-sell, it takes the form of upsell. Upsells take the form of additional seats, they take the form of higher tiers and usage. And so it's actually quite different, although there are similar principles that apply when you're cross-selling versus upselling versus selling expansion. Which begs the question, why is expansion so hard, so important in today's SaaS environment? Look, it's not as simple as, okay, we just need to make our companies more money. Fact of the matter is, look, customers who buy more stick around longer. Expansion allows you to churn more customers who are not ideal fits, which that is like the best day in my life when I could walk away from a poor fit deal. Expansion also puts more money in your pocket. I'm sure you're not complaining. I mean, it's clearly and obviously the case that those of us who own expansion get paid a bit more, a good bit more. And expansion also justifies hiring a large expanded team with the right resources. When I built that motion where customer success was 2/3 of net new revenue with my team, customer success was 1/3 of the company. It was 82 people, because we kept investing in our own customers' growth. But, it begs the question, why is it so hard, right? Why is expansion so hard? And feel free to chime in the chat, by the way, on why you find it hard. I'll tell my story. My story of why it's hard is that it's not just my own personal preference. I mentioned a few things before. I mentioned skill, I mentioned interest, I mentioned bandwidth. But guess what? At the company level, you're selling to a limited TAM, total addressable market. You're running the risk of burning bridges with your customers. So the stakes are extremely high. Because if you fail on an expansion, what if that turns into a churn? That's like double the risk on the same deal. You're also running the risk of burning out your team. And we often lack the skills and practice, as I mentioned. And by the way, it's not always going to be as easy as this diagram, which this is almost an exact representation of my first upsell. I was having lunch in the office. My CEO came up to me, put his arm up, and I thought he was going to hit me. And I was like, whoa, what are you doing? He was like, high-fiving you. I was like, oh, okay, what, why? And he was like, I heard you're slinging some product. I was like, I am? Oh, yeah, of course I am. So one of our customers, they were like, yeah, we're too big for this basic plan you've got us on. Can we upgrade to the enterprise plan? And I was like, yeah, sure, why not? And I just click a drop down, move them to the enterprise plan. That was me. That was me doing my first upsell. Pat myself on the back there. But how do you build that into a scalable, repeatable process, a measurable process that's represented in dashboards and playbooks and scalable, repeatable motions that customers actually enjoy and that you actually enjoy? That's the pivot point for me to now get into this 30, 60, 90 plan. I'm going to do a very high level. I've only cherry picked some of my best learnings, but there are a lot more. I can talk about this honestly for days. Some people have written books on this stuff. So I want you to chime in the chat on what seems most intriguing to you. So there's the first phase, which is around making the case to own expansion. So that involves roles and responsibility definition between customer success and sales. That involves KPIs and metrics. That involves sometimes building out unique roles, like one that I built out that was very successful is this commercial CSM role, which sounds a lot like a traditional account manager, but it's not, because it's actually built on customer success principles instead of just sales principles. The second piece, and again, just throw in the chat 1, 2, 3, or 4 to tell me what you're interested in. We'll do a flyover on all of them, but I want to know where to spend the most time. The second piece is around, say you're 30 days in. Now you've got your team at the point where you start mentally preparing to sell. You start working on your talk tracks and your discovery processes, which, by the way, customer success folks in the room, we are typically painfully untrained in discovery, objection handling as well. That's a really hard one. The third one is all about scale. So let's imagine you've got your preparation practice down. Now it's all about scale. So now you start thinking about, how do I sell during the onboarding process? Sounds super counterintuitive to start, but there's a method for that. How do I sell to customers who call into support? I called into LegalZoom recently and they upsold me on something. I had a fantastic experience. That is something we can talk about: how to staff and hire for these roles, how to do RevOps and playbook development for these roles. And then the last one is around iteration. So how do you master the data? How do you remap your customer journey? How do you manage your pipeline at scale? Because honestly, it doesn't look a lot like that Glengarry Glen Ross clip that we watched. I'm seeing a lot of 2s and 3s coming into the chat. So what I'll do a flyover over 1 and 4, and then we'll spend most of our time on 2 and 3 with time for Q&A at the end. So making the case to leadership. Boy, did I do this the wrong way when I started. The way that I started doing this when I was early in my career was, I should own expansion because it's really good for my career growth. You know what my CEO didn't care about? Hate to say it, my career growth. I hadn't truly aligned the business priorities with my priorities and framed it to the success of the business. Now, we've all heard this debate a billion times: who should own expansion, customer success, or sales? And account management emerged out of this exact debate, right? And what I learned, these are things I learned the hard way. I'm going to do a really quick flyover on these. That I had to learn to speak the language of the executive team. I had to learn to talk about sales efficiency and burn ratios and conversion rates and win rates and payback periods and LTV to CAC ratios. These are things that I didn't know what the hell they were. Pardon my French. I had to learn new workflows. I had to learn what it meant to track dials and build sales cadences. I didn't know anything about that early on. And I also learned, by the way, a lot of the customer success leaders in the room, a lot of us haven't done this ourselves. And I learned I had to throw myself in the ring first and do the sales myself. I also learned I had to have very diplomatic relationships with sales. So, but the most important thing was that I had to learn how to build a financial forecast to take how many total accounts we had, what % were qualified, how that number changes over time, which is very difficult to build in a spreadsheet, a dynamic model of how many customers you have and how many qualified opportunities you have, because you're getting new customers, you're churning out old ones, you're also disqualifying. It's a very difficult thing to build. I had to learn how to do that. And I also had to learn how to segment the market. The big 3 segments that I found most helpful for any customer success team, I tend to describe it the way my high school physics teacher did. If you're seeing me on camera, did basically a 3-dimensional XYZ diagram. The big things I think about are segmenting based on revenue, based on risk, and based on growth potential. So if you're trying to segment your customer base and you're on this call, I think the big 3 to think about is not so much industry vertical, geography, but the big 3 to think about first are revenue, risk, and growth potential. So I don't want to have this debate over who should own customer success and sales, because it's been done. But what I have done, and I hope to share with the audience here, is just I've taken bits and pieces of every one of these conversations I've heard around who should own customer success or who should own expansion between customer success and sales. And I've tried to put it all in one place. So we have one collective source of truth as an industry. Maybe it's a bit of an ambitious goal on my side. One collective source of truth that says, okay, here are all the arguments, the pros and cons of why sales should own expansion. Sales knows how to carry a quota, manage a pipeline, use automation tools, pitch effectively. Basically, you could saddle a salesperson with a $500,000 quota at some companies, and you could say, all right, I feel confident that bet will pay off. Which, if you're in customer success here, ask yourself, would you feel comfortable with that expectation? Obviously, we in customer success, who's most of the audience here, we're drinking the Kool-Aid, and we know, well, sales timing is off, and sales lacks context, and sales burns bridges with customers and oversells. And the big concern that most leaders have is that net new logos drop off when sales is responsible for expansion. So we'll file that away. Let's say, all right, this is not the optimal model. Maybe the optimal model is that on the other side of the coin, the customer success zone's expansion. We have just right timing. We have ample context. We win customer trust. It's a cleaner experience. But honestly, finding a customer success person who can expand customers really effectively and methodically, managing a true pipeline of expansion that is reported on a weekly basis is kind of like finding a unicorn for the reasons that we mentioned. There's a bunch of hybrid models we've seen that CSM owns low revenue expansion, sales owns high revenue expansion, or CS owns low complexity deals, sales owns high complexity deals, CS owns demo setting, sales owns closing. Look, I don't want to rehash all of these, but basically none of them are my favorite as the one that I've had the most success with, which is that you create a new role, a commercial CSM role, who's trained on the principles of customer success, lives in the customer success function, is in all the customer success meetings, understands the trends that are happening when it comes to customer satisfaction, NPS, CSAT, understands usage trends, can draw really clear insights about expansion triggers, which, by the way, if you're not thinking about expansion triggers, that's a very, very important takeaway to know when's the right timing to approach a customer based on events that have happened within their engagement with your product or solution. The only downside is that sometimes it may not be affordable for early stage companies. But if you're looking to build this rollout, definitely drop me a note because I have had some successes and some failures, but overall successes with this type of model. So like I said, I want to get to the meat of the presentation, which is everyone seems to be most interested in 2 and 3. How do you prepare and practice with your team? How do you get to phase 2? You've completed your first 30 days. Imagine magic wand, you've won the opportunity to expand. Now you got to prove it. The rubber meets the road. Well, how does the rubber meet the road? Like I said, there have been volumes written about how to sell. I'm a junkie for a sales podcast, even though I've never had sales as my official job title. So what I learned is that to mentally prepare customer success sellers, the first thing you probably want to do is outline your playbook. So this is just a sample. This is a real sample that I worked on with about 13 companies with an on-site, where we said, let's boil down to 1 page everything we need to have in our expansion playbook. And so it included expansion triggers, it included the customer journey, it included products and pricing, it included value propositions, enablement strategies, ownership models, sales methodologies, mechanisms to execute. Probably most importantly, objections and rebuttals. We're going to talk about that for a bit. Success metrics, and then how do you close win and close lose deals? How do you establish some team-wide best practices that can help your team excel? It's 1 page, but it's a ton. When you actually fill out all these blanks, it takes probably pages on pages. Regardless, the key thing is you've got to get your team over that hurdle of not wanting to sell. I think there are key things to acknowledge with your CS team if you're expecting your CS team to sell. If your CS team is one of these teams that's expected to suddenly own revenue, that look, imposter syndrome is normal. It happens to the best of us. Also, many customers want to be sold to, which is a very interesting thing. When I called LegalZoom as a customer for my business, I was actually very excited to see them sell to me. I felt honored that they would look into my business and say, hey, you seem like you need this. And also practice, practice, practice. A lot of us are familiar with, we've seen a sales room full of SDRs, BDRs, all talking at the same time, practicing their scripts with each other. But we almost never see that in customer success. I think we have not only an opportunity to do that, but there's opportunities to practice on low-risk deals. If you have a customer advisory board, sometimes those are the best deals that I've gained my familiarity with the right talk tracks, the right scripting, the right processes, the right protocols. My low ARR customers, I'd rather burn those than the big ones. Sometimes I just practice on gatekeepers who are trying to prevent the economic buyer behind the scenes from ever talking to me. I work on my scripting with them, or I work on my scripting with disqualified deals. It sounds like a total waste of time. It's not. It actually helps you to develop your disqualification criteria. And so speaking to economic buyers, this is another thing we talk about a ton in customer success, which is this question of how do you earn a seat at the executive table? And I learned a lot from this from a sales book, not a customer success book, called Selling to Veto. Veto, V-I-T-O, which if you know what that's an acronym for, throw it in the chat. Veto is not my uncle from Staten Island who taught me how to throw a liver punch. Well, it might be. Rob Zambito, kind of fits the bill. But anyway, Veto is very important top officer. Veto is the person behind the scenes who makes the decisions. And do you know how many customer success folks I've had the conversation with that they're not just asking, what is the internal approval process we have to use to get this deal across the line? It's one of the most fundamental discovery questions in sales that we learn in sales to outline from day one with a customer, with a prospect. The question is, what is the internal approval process you're going to have to walk through when it comes to getting this across the line? Not to mention all the other discovery questions around what are the pains you're dealing with today? What are the initiatives you're working on? What are the timelines that you have at stake? And all the other key questions that it actually takes to close the deal. So I always recommend to invest in proper discovery processes. And when you do get a chance to speak to Vito Corleone here, there's a lot of things that you don't want to be startled when you finally get their ear. There's an example opener that I linked here that I'm happy to share. Basically, it summarizes that you've got to earn that person's attention. You don't want to get that person's attention and say like, "Hi, is this Mark?" You want to be able to have a conversation as a business professional with the supposed Mark, right? And the way that I often have that conversation, this helped me get over a lot of hesitation on my part. I learned to be candid with customers. I learned to disassemble this idea of what a salesperson was in my head and be upfront with customers and say, I am not on the sales team. I'm on the customer success team. My job here is to make sure that you're successful and as successful as possible with all aspects of our product across all lines of your business. What that entails is making sure that you're at the very least aware of all product lines that we offer and what value they could bring to your operation. Do you mind if I tell you why I reached out to you specifically? There's actually a lot of wisdom in that last line. You specifically helps get that very important top officer's attention. And the do you mind question is usually helpful. Look, I'm not trying to sound manipulative here, but if you ask people, are you open to listening or are you open to hearing more? There's a certain persona that just wants to say no. And if you say, do you mind? And they say no, that actually implies that you should proceed. So I'm not trying to manipulate the conversation. I think that there's just linguistic truth in how we sort of how we create situations that lead to the outcomes that we're looking for. I often tell people too, look, I'm perfectly fine if you don't want to move forward. If all I get is feedback from you, that's okay. That's still a win for me. However, I do think there's ROI here, and I will pursue that as the outcome. I want to work together on this. This is the most authentic way, channeling my inner Chris Voss. Thanks, David. Yes, I actually am a big student of Chris Voss. This is the most authentic way that I've learned to present myself to my customers and just acknowledge, look, I'm here to sell you because I want to work together. Big thing that comes with this is not selling the F words. So the F words are features and functionality. A lot of us in customer success, we have a poor tendency to sell features and functionality. And it makes me think of that sell me this pen exercise where, again, you ask anybody in sales, how are you supposed to handle that exercise where someone says, sell me this pen? The way to sell a pen is not to say like, oh, it writes upside down and you can write in space, because who cares if it writes in space? Like, that's all information about the pen. The right way to sell the pen is to understand the buyer and say, how long have you been in the market for a pen? What do you use a pen for? Do you have a desk job? Are you out in the field? Like, what are you using a pen for? Help me understand you. That's how you approach the conversation with a customer-centric approach. Another Wolf of Wall Street reference. I'm just killing it with the movies. Anyway, and there's a lot of other advice that I could ramble on, but I want to be mindful of time. For example, what to do when you get the answer you want. Because when you're ready to actually close that deal, well, I've seen a lot of customer success folks fumble with the opportunity and not be prepared for the conversation to go right, which is kind of crazy. The conversation also goes wrong, right? There's a lot of objection handling that happens in this expansion process. Sometimes that expansion process is even just pure adoption expansion. Like we're trying to expand customers. I used to work with big banks as a client. They would have hundreds of branches across the country, and selling each branch actually was like its own net new sale. So I was selling all day to new branches. And what I had to learn to do was actually not just know my objections and rebuttals, but document them, train my team on them, get my team aligned on the same page. Most customer success teams that I talk to, we do a maturity assessment at Success Scaled. I ask them from day one, do you have an objection rebuttal document for your renewals process, for your expansion process, for your churn handling process? Do you have objection rebuttal documentation? They'll say, I think our sales team has that, but no, we don't have that. And I'm like, you mean to tell me that we haven't aligned as a team on how we handle standard objections? That we don't have basic battle cards for like, okay, customers saying they're going to leave to this competitor. We don't know how to talk in a sophisticated way about that competitor versus us. That's really like, that's on us, right? And it also boils down to examples like, that I have to check with my business partner to get this renewal across the line or get this expansion across the line. Like these are fundamentals that our counterparts in sales have done for decades. And the main reason why we're having a hard time earning a seat at the table, in my mind, is because a lot of us don't have these fundamentals in place yet. Even fundamentals like those of us who have been in sales probably know the feel, felt, found methodology. If you haven't heard this before, very, very simple way of handling objections. When a customer objects to you, is also good for like de-escalating angry customers. If a customer objects to you, it's our tendency to just want to say no and disagree with them. But the feel, felt, found method is a simple way to do some CS Aikido and say, feel where you're coming from, I've dealt with people who have felt that way before. Can I share what I've found? I like the can I share what I've found because it allows a permission-based approach instead of just talking at the customer. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to confirm back to the customer the check boxes you need to check off in order to close the deal, right? So I try to close, I still do this as a consultant today if I'm trying to sell new deals for myself. I'm like, so just to confirm, the check boxes we need to check off are that budget and timing are correct. If we get those across the line, we're good to schedule the kickoff. There's a lot more do's and don'ts around like assuming the sale and utilizing forced choices and having contracts ready to go and stuff like that, making the buying process very easy. But that's a good segue for me just to close out with a couple little things on how do you actually scale? So this is the biggest irony that I found probably in the last 10 years. I initially said to myself, we're expected to be a revenue function in customer success. How are we going to do that? What if we try baking the expansion process into the onboarding process? And I said to myself, there is no way this is going to work. We just sold these customers. They're going to feel oversold. They're going to feel like we're just trying to upsell them at every turn. And what I actually found is that if we bake the expansion process in the onboarding process with the right incentives at the end, customers will leave the onboarding process with, at the very least, an awareness of a demo held on our expansion product lines. So what we did was we created an onboarding process where we said, your onboarding process is 5 simple steps. It's setup, it's training, it's a demo on product number 1, it's a demo on product number 2, and it's a demo on product number 3. And guess what? If you complete all 5 of those steps, at the end of the process, you get a rebate on your onboarding fee. You paid thousands of dollars up front for this onboarding fee, but guess what? If you complete the onboarding process and you launch within 90 days or 60 days, we're going to give you a rebate back. Customers would leave that kickoff meeting not only with their upsell demos set, but they were high-fiving because they had a reward at the end of the process, which was super cool. It doesn't work in every model, but the principle of saying our customers need to be incentivized to expand and to complete onboarding quickly, and that we can actually marry those goals together was really interesting. It also helped me when it came to, I see Five Guys Fries as a reference here. Yeah, that's a good point. Honestly, look, my background, when I was a teenager, I was a diner waiter in upstate New York. And I learned a lot of what I know about upsell by just trying to squeeze out a 15% tip on an extra side of fries. But I honestly, I see it all around. Like I see it, I went to get my oil changed at Valvoline, and Valvoline is so good at this. My wife, she thinks I'm crazy because anytime we go to get our oil changed, I'm like, watch them. They're going to upsell me. It's going to be so good. And I love how they have their playbooks defined. They are not sponsoring this podcast, this webinar, but guess what? I love how they do it. Basically having a clearly scalable, repeatable, consistent, measurable process for expanding customers. You can even do that in the support motion as well. Like I said, I had my support team turn into an expansion team because I spiffed my support team that they would get $100 every time they set a demo that got held for an expansion product. And they had to do it carefully. They had to make sure that they were pulling up the Salesforce record for the account and that they were checking about the account's needs and experiences. And the really cool thing is it got our support team to think holistically about our customers' businesses. Our support team stopped thinking about, how do I solve this ticket? And it got them out of Zendesk. And it got them into Salesforce. And it got them thinking about, what is the customer journey? What does this customer need? Is there an opportunity for me to introduce additional products that could be really helpful? Again, felt super risky because I was so worried our customers, we would burn bridges with our customers. But with the right incentives across the board, our customers actually loved the experience. So that then enabled us to actually staff and hire at scale. I'm going to skip over this, but if you want to talk about how to hire and staff for an expansion motion, it's a very delicate thing. Not only just finding the right person, but also how do you afford that person? How do you model the finances around hiring an expansion role? And then also, how do you build out RevOps? This is something I can geek out on for so long, probably way too long. But I'm going to close out with this. And I want to leave room for some Q&A in the last 10 minutes or so. How do you iterate? So now we've got the fundamentals. Again, just to recap, we talked about how do we make the case? We talked about how do we practice our team? We talked about how do you start to scale across onboarding, support, RevOps, and various other elements of the customer lifecycle. Now it's time to iterate. So iteration involved becoming a master of your customer data. At this point, if you're not getting a hold of clean data, shout out to Erwin, who I saw in the chat, by the way. Erwin's a data master, Erwin Hipsman. But anyway, if you don't have clean data, good luck scaling the motion, right? But you have to know, you just have to not only have clean data, you have to know your conversion rates, your top logos, your close won, your close loss reasons over time. One of the key questions I ask folks when they're trying to build out this motion is, can you tell me the top 3 close loss reasons for this expansion motion in the last 90 days? And the number of times that I get the answer, we'll have to look that up. And to look that up, we have to ask this person, and this person has to check with that person, and we have to check this and that. Like, that's a question we should all be able to answer if we're building a scalable, repeatable, measurable motion. I also always recommend obsessing over the customer journey. Put yourself through the customer journey. Act as a customer. If you wouldn't like the experience as a customer, and do this every 6 months. This is not just a one-time thing. But if you don't like the experience as a customer, why are you putting your customers through that journey? And then the last thing, just to close out, is think critically about pipeline management. None of us here are likely to build that culture that is that Glengarry Glen Ross cutthroat boiler room type environment. We all see that for what it is, and it's not the culture we're trying to build. So what typically has worked for me is maintaining weekly pipeline meetings. They're usually not a team wide because, that just looks like the team being put under the gun in front of their coworkers and maybe their friends saying like, oh yeah, this deal isn't commit, when really it's not. However, I think we have the opportunity in customer success and post-sale motions to create a model where we have functionally blameless postmortems. We talk about closed lost deals as often as we talk about closed won deals. And we have a very scientific analytical approach at scale. So just to recap, you came to this session, hopefully, because you wanted to learn some scalable, practical strategies for expansion. The top right of this diagram around upselling and cross-selling, I would encourage you to ask yourself, what does that look like today? What level of maturity do we have? Are we at an A plus? Are we at an F? Are we somewhere in between? And what did I hear today that sounds like something I might be able to act on and get in front of my leadership team to build a scalable, repeatable motion? So all this to say, look, I'm here to help. I've built my whole career around helping people get over the hurdles that I have. I have a lot of recommendations besides selling DeVito. 30 Minutes to President's Club is a podcast that I love. It's just a couple of sales junkies who are talking all about the different ways to, actually, I've learned the most about their playbooks around cold calling. Not because I do any cold calling, but just because their method, their strategy, and their way of measuring results is like really good. Revenue Builders podcast. I also want to shout out the person I learned the most in my career from in sales is my friend Scott Leese, who's a many-time sales leader. I probably can't count on 4 hands how many times he's led a sales team. And I had the privilege of working with Scott for about 4 years at Qualia, where we built a really scalable expansion motion. And he has some really cool stuff around like something he calls the addiction model of selling. So I'm here to help. My email is hello@robzambito.com, hopefully easy to remember, and connect with me on LinkedIn if you haven't already. And I'd love to hear some Q&A from the group.
Awesome job, Rob. Thank you so much. I know I've been following the chat. Tons of people getting lots of value. So reminder to anybody who has not dropped a question into the Q&A, please go ahead and do so that way I can get them in front of Rob. You can also go and upvote any of the questions. So if there's a question in there and you're scanning through and there's one that you really, really want us to answer, go and upvote it, and then I will prioritize by upvoted questions. In the meantime, okay, there we go. We got some that are upvoted. Okay, very good. So go ahead and upvote. Just at least help us prioritize what we get to because we've got 7 minutes. Rob, you ready? Fastest Q&A.
Ready?
Ready?
Let's
okay.
do it.
All right, first one here. I'm curious about how you define the commercial CSM versus the account manager role. What are the differences and similarities?
Commercial CSM is hyper-focused on usage and satisfaction metrics, health scores, elements that account managers historically have not been.
Okay, I hope that helps, guys. You can always send follow-up questions directly to Rob on LinkedIn. All right, next question here. Selling during onboarding. You mentioned incentivizing customers so they listen to more product demos. What do you recommend if we don't have onboarding fees?
That's a good question. Well, I recommend introducing them. You want to create various ways to incentivize the customer. I mean, you could also offer other incentives. I've seen models where customers get some kind of gift card at the end of the onboarding process. Look, an Olive Garden gift card has got me further in life than I ever anticipated. And I've also seen models where I have a friend, she put in a model where they penalized customers for taking too long in the onboarding process. That one's dicey, but you could consider that model.
Very good. All right, next one up. Watching the clock. For customer segmentation, this is from Joe. For customer segmentation, what do you mean by risk as a pillar with revenue and upsell? Do you mean industry risks such as oil and gas, or do you mean the risk of the product fit or something else?
I mean churn risk. Yeah. So I prioritize customers. When I have too many customers to deal with, I ask myself in the morning, who's my highest revenue customers? who are my highest growth potential customers, and then who are my highest churn risk customers.
All right, very good. On to the next one. All right, this is from Mindy. How do you protect CS bandwidth when many new logo sales had minimal procurement processes, but expansion phases required more rigorous InfoSec reviews and procurement documentation? How are you managing the increased administrative load while maintaining expansion momentum on top of all other CS responsibilities?
Great question, because one of the things I would love to talk about more is how do you build defined stages for your process, your expansion process. The right playbook with the right stages can make double the volume of business feel like less work. And even regardless of the very difficult criteria and checkboxes that you have to cross in order to close a deal.
All right, we're going to keep going. We got 4 minutes left. Hitting refresh here to see if there's any more with more upvotes. Okay, Erwin asked, with more and more digital customer success, can expansions be done via campaigns rather than humans?
Absolutely. I love a digital expansion motion. It's one of my favorite things to build. I ended up talking today mostly about a human-led expansion motion, but I've built out expansion motions that actually live in product marketing. Companies where there is no customer success team, companies where one of my clients, I remember I asked, it was like a consumer model. And I asked the person who oversaw the expansion motion, when was the last time you talked to a customer? His answer was, why would I ever do that? And I don't agree with that philosophy or that strategy. But the point is, he was building a purely digitized motion where he never talked to customers. It's kind of interesting.
All right, very good. Next question. Anonymous. What if we have to work in pods or directly with an AE? What recommendations do you have that work well with those situations?
Yeah. Build a really good RACI chart. If you don't know what a RACI chart is, it is basically an accountability chart that says who's responsible for what, who's accountable for what, who's consulted for what, and who's informed of what. It's really important that the customer not feel your org chart. That's a piece of advice that I heard a couple of years ago that I try to use all the time. Don't let the customer feel your org chart.
All right, let's see. 3 minutes. Here we go. All right, Rob. Well, actually, Erwin, you get one question at a time. So hold on. I'm going to the next one. Gotta be fair. Gotta be fair. All right. Anonymous. What are the most common compensation points you use to reward a CSM?
It's a good question. So there's different models. I usually start with a spiff model. I move into some sort of bonus model. I usually then move into a team-wide variable comp model with proper like OTE, and then an individualized OTE model. So the reason I said I move from one to the next is because that varies depending on the stage of company that you're at. Usually when it's the early stages of this motion, you don't have the ability to build a very sophisticated OTE model because you just don't have the data and the predictability. But spiffs go a long way to start getting a little bit of traction, tracking a little bit of data. And the most important thing is that you're setting really clear expectations with your team that this thing will change over time, that the way that you're compensated today is going to change, hopefully only for the better.
All right, 2 minutes left. We can do this. We can do at least one more. Let me see. I'm scrolling.
Let's do it.
Let's see. I'm trying to find a fun one.
No one asking about Planet Fitness. Okay.
No, I thought that was a very interesting stat. Not that it was an interesting stat, but that interesting that you're keeping track of that.
It's a long story.
All right, so we'll do this one. So what if CSM's key KPIs are around customer activation, MEUs, or other non-revenue metrics? Do you find it's easier or harder for CSMs to sell expansion?
Totally harder. It's totally harder. And that's why phase one, as I mentioned in this 30, 60, 90, is around gaining buy-in across the company that this is something that you should be focusing on. So it's a difficult case to make, but if you can speak the language of expansion, then I think you earn that seat, that right to be the one who's responsible on the RACI chart.
So Rob, that brings us to the top of the hour. So we can't get to another question because I refuse to run a minute over and take advantage of anyone's schedule and availability. So I just want to start by thanking you, Rob, so much for this fantastic session. I know that I got so much out of it. I know the audience got so much out of it. So thank you so much. I am confident you will probably have a lot of DMs. So pay attention. There's probably lots
I
of
hope
follow
so.
up. And maybe this requires a part 2 to go deeper into some of this stuff. So maybe if there's enough people that reach out to me and say we want Rob back for a part 2, we can make that happen. But super grateful for your time and your expertise today, Rob. And then also super grateful for everyone who's made the time to attend and join us today. I know that time is our greatest currency and it is a gift that you are willing to give us. So we appreciate it. It is not lost on us here at Client Success. So super grateful for all of you for participating in today's webinar. Don't worry if you had to leave early or something happened or you joined late, the recording will be made available shortly. Please connect with Rob on LinkedIn. Obviously, he's a wealth of knowledge, great friend, great resource in the community. So make sure that you're dialed in, following along with his content and his expertise, all of his podcasts and everything else great that Rob does. Thank you guys again, and hopefully we'll see you back here next Tuesday for another webinar. Thank you guys.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Christy. See you.